Hello, this is Slow Night, Sleepy Stories. In a world that demands us to be constantly awake and busy, there is a certain power in being able to sleep soundly. Tonight's hero, So Daeseong, was a master of this art. Before he became a legendary general who saved the country, he was known simply as a man who loved to sleep. Even when he had nothing to his name, and even when people pointed fingers at him, he would simply lie down and drift into a deep, untroubled slumber. His sleep was not laziness. It was a sign of a heart so big and a mind so calm that the worries of the world could not shake him. Tonight I invite you to borrow his carefree spirit. Let the world spin on its own outside your window. It does not need your attention right now. Like a sleeping dragon preparing for flight, your body needs this rest. So cast aside your armor of daily life. Lie back, close your eyes, and let's sink into the heavy, comfortable sleep of a hero. The birth and upbringing of So. During the Chenghua era of the great Ming dynasty, there was a prime minister whose surname was So and given name was Riang. His talent and virtue shook the whole country. He had ascended to the Dragon Gate early, reached the position of Minister of War, and his reputation covered the court and the countryside. He eventually resigned from office and returned to his hometown in the land of Haedong, Korea, to become a man of leisure. His family fortune was wealthy, and he had nothing to envy in the world, but he had not a single child at his knees, so he grieved day and night. One day, the minister sighed to his wife, saying, "Our ancestors' sacrifices have reached my generation, but there is no one to transmit the incense and fire. When I return to the underworld, with what face will I see my ancestors?" And he wet his collar with tears. The wife left her seat and replied, "Among the 3,000 sins, having no heir is the greatest. The grace of allowing me, a concubine, to stay in your noble family is something I can never forget, even when my bones turn white. I wish for you, my lord, to take a wise lady and see a noble son, so that I may avoid the 7 valid grounds for divorce." The minister looked sorrowful and sighed, saying, "This is due to my lack of virtue, not the wife's sin." And they comforted each other. Suddenly, a servant girl reported, "An old monk has come outside and wishes to see the Lord." The minister immediately went out to the outer quarters to greet the old monk and examined him. He was about 80 years old, his face was like jade, and his bearing was dignified, showing no dust of the secular world. The minister thought, "I am in the countryside, yet my name shakes the 4 seas. If he were an ordinary monk, how would he dare to boldly request me?" He bowed his body and replied with courtesy, "Where does the teacher reside, and what errand do you wish to speak of?" The old monk said, "I, a humble monk, reside at Cheongyongsa Temple on Mount Yeongbo in the western regions. The temple has fallen into disrepair, so I wish to save the Buddha from wind and rain, but I worried about the lack of financial power. Hearing that the Lord likes to perform charity, I have come a long way to see you." The minister was pleased and said, "I have much wealth but no children and nowhere to pass it on. I would rather give it to the Buddha and cultivate descendants." He replied, "How much material do you need to use?" The old monk said, "The amount of material does not matter. Please make an offering according to the Lord's situation." The minister immediately gave 500 taels of gold and 1,000 taels of white silver, saying, "Teacher, you do not think of the trouble for the sake of the Buddha. How could I spare wealth? This is meager, but after repairing the dilapidation, I hope you will pray for me to be blessed with a child, even if disabled." The old monk laughed and said, "If you give gold to see a child, is there anyone under heaven who would be childless?" The minister said, "It is called sincerity." The monk said, "It is said that sincerity moves heaven. If the world-honored one knows, you will surely obtain an heir, but he may come to a world of disability." Finishing his words, he went down the steps and took a few steps, and then his whereabouts became unknown. The minister was greatly surprised, bowed countless times toward the air, and told this to his wife, who also considered it strange. One day, heaven and earth were foggy and thunder shook the air, when a blue-clad boy descended and bowed twice to the wife, saying, "I was the son of the dragon of the East Sea, but because I gave rain wrongly, I was cast out by the Supreme Emperor and did not know where to go. Since the Buddha of Cheongyongsa Temple instructed me, I have come, so please pity me." And he entered her bosom. She woke up in surprise and realized it was a dream. The wife told the dream to the minister, and the minister was happy, saying, "Did the Buddha previously become moved by my sincerity and bless us with a child?" Indeed, she became pregnant from that month, and when 10 months passed, auspicious energy filled the air and she gave birth to a jade-like boy. He had the face of a dragon, the head of a leopard, the back of a bear, the waist of a tiger, and the arms of a gibbon. His voice was majestic like the ringing of bells and drums, truly a rare man under heaven. The minister was filled with joy, named him Daeseong, and gave him the style name Yongbu. Time flowed like water, and when Daesong became 10 years old, he had the appearance of Pan Yue and the bearing of Du Mu, and possessed the writing of Li Bai and the calligraphy of Wang Shiqi, so there was no one who did not praise him. The minister always worried about his premature maturity, but it is an ancient truth that sorrow comes when joy is exhausted. The minister suddenly fell ill, and 100 medicines were ineffective. Finally, knowing he could not recover, he shed tears and said, "My illness is not light, so I will become a guest of the Yellow Springs underworld. Dying now is not bad, but not seeing Daesong grow up is my lingering regret. However, what can be done about heaven's mandate?" He looked back at his wife and said, "After I die, do not grieve excessively, but raise Daesong well to shine upon our family gate." Then his life ended. Amidst the extreme grief, the wife frequently fainted, then barely regained her senses, held Daesong's hand, and sighed. What is difficult to escape in the world is human life. What shall we do in the future? You must by all means preserve your body to console our lonely souls. And after speaking, her life ended. How could one record the extreme pain of Daesong? Suffering the sorrow of heaven and earth collapsing in one morning, he frequently fainted, then barely gathered his mind, led the servants to prepare the rites, and buried them in the ancestral mountain. Although he was young, his propriety was extreme, surpassing even adults, so everyone in the village praised him. Time passed like a stream, and upon completing the 3-year mourning, Daesong's sorrow was even more earnest. After passing the mourning period, he realized the family fortune was gradually exhausted and it was difficult to keep the property. He sold the remaining fields, gave them to the servants to keep the house, and left the house with only 50 taels of silver. He headed west and reached the border of Suzhou. As the day grew dark, he found an inn, bought dinner, and rested. In the next room, a person cried sadly all night long, calling out to heaven and earth. The student Daesong was also saddened and could not sleep. After daybreak, he looked for the person who had cried, and it was a white-haired old man. When asked the reason for his weeping, the old man replied, "My age is 70, and my old mother's age was 89. Unhappily, she passed away this spring, and I performed a temporary burial. But summer passed and autumn came, and I have no means to perform a proper burial, so I cannot gather my old mother's bones, and thus I weep." The student heard these words and, unable to overcome his pity, shed tears and gave him 50 taels of silver, saying, "I am also a person who has lost heaven and earth, parents." Seeing the old man's filial piety, how could I not be moved? Although this is small, add it to the funeral expenses. The old man received the money and bowed his head to give thanks, saying, "How could 50 taels of silver be called small? You enable me to avoid unfilial piety at the age of 70, so the grace is unforgettable even in death. I wish to know your high name." The student sighed. Heaven was moved by the old man's filial piety. How is it my virtue? I travel the 4 directions without a fixed place. What use is it to know my name? And he took his leave. The old man bowed 100 times and knocked his head on the ground. As the student left, his travel funds were exhausted and he had to beg for food. Originally, his frame was large and he ate 1 mal, a unit of volume of rice. Since he had to beg, how could he fill that amount? He could not endure hunger and thirst and was extremely destitute, but he did not think even a little about the silver he gave. His magnanimity could be known. Like this, time passed for a long time. He herded others' cows and sheep and cut wood, barely sustaining his life. Unable to endure starvation, his face became haggard and his clothes tattered. That splendid, rare man became a hungry beggar. So how could heaven be so indifferent? At this time, there was a prime minister named Li Jin in Cheongju who resigned from office at the age of 70 and returned to his hometown. With his wife, Lady Wang, he spent his time plowing fields in the clouds and fishing under the moon. He had 3 sons and 2 daughters. The eldest son's name was Taegyeong, the second Jongyeong, and the third Pilgyeong. They were all accomplished in noble families. The eldest daughter's name was Chae-ran, who became the daughter-in-law of Jong-yang, the Minister of Works. The second daughter's name was Chae-bong, and she was 13 years old, like the spring light. When Lady Wang gave birth to Chae-bong, auspicious clouds surrounded the house, and a pair of fairies descended and said, "We are fairies of the Moon Palace, receiving the order of Chang'e. We indicate that you should raise this baby well and form a worldly connection with the crown prince of the Dragon King of the East Sea. Do not disobey the heavenly arrangement." And they floated up into the colorful clouds. The lady told the fairies' words to the prime minister, and the prime minister considered it mysterious. Therefore, the prime minister and his wife loved her like a jewel in their hands. Time flowed, and when she reached the age of 15, her beautiful face and fairy-like attitude were graceful and quiet. Her writing and calligraphy surprised ghosts, and she possessed the virtue of Ren and the beauty of Jiang, a beauty of old. So the prime minister cherished her, saying to his wife, "Chae-bong is a gentleman among women. I fear there is no suitable match in the human world. If we cannot find her pair, it would be better to spend time in the women's quarters." The wife replied, "Since ancient times, when a phoenix is born, a fenghuang is born. When King Wen was born, Taisi was born. In the wide world, how could there be no mate for Chae-bong?" The prime minister laughed. "The lady's words are extremely correct, but where is there someone like King Wen in the world?" And calling the young lady, he stroked her jade-like hands and cherished her even more. After this, the prime minister sought a son-in-law widely, but since there was no suitable place, he was distressed in his heart. He brought out wine, got drunk, and was leaning alone on his desk when suddenly he followed a butterfly and arrived at a place. This place was the fishing terrace on Mount Wolyong, where he used to go up to recite poems in the breeze and moonlight during his leisure time. Entering with a drunken interest, he saw auspicious clouds hovering over a rock by the stream, shining brightly. Finding it strange, he went closer and saw a blue dragon coiled there, which saw the prime minister and soared into the air. He woke up in surprise, and it was a dream. Considering it very strange, he immediately took his bamboo staff and straw shoes and went up to the small terrace. A woodcutter boy had cut wood, taken off his clothes by the stream, and was lying down relying on the shade of a willow tree. The prime minister went closer and saw that his clothes were tattered and could not cover his body. His hair was messy and covered his face, grime was knotted in rows, and lice from starvation were coming down in pairs from under his ears. He could not look directly at the filthiness. However, a faint skeletal structure shone through the grime. The prime minister caught the lice and waited for him to wake up. After a while, the boy turned his body and fell asleep again. The prime minister lowered his voice and said, "The spring day is drowsy, but what sleep do you sleep so long? If you get up and sit, I have something to say." The boy scratched his head, opened his eyes to look, got up, sat, and bowed his head. The prime minister looked closely and saw the spirit of heaven and earth and the bright light of the sun and moon shining. Truly, he was a Kirin in the water and a phoenix in the gold. If not for the prime minister's bright mirror, insight, who would know Daeseong? The prime minister was greatly delighted at first sight and thought, "I have been seeking a marriage partner, and today I have finally met a hero." He held Daesong's hand and said, "What is your name, and for what reason are you so destitute?" The boy frowned and replied, "I am a begging child who does not know that heaven is high and the earth is fearful, so how can I be called a person? There is no use asking a beggar's name." The prime minister said, "Since you say you do not know heaven and earth, I know you have no parents, but why do you hide the truth?" The boy pondered for a long time and sighed. "Since the great man asks extremely, how can I hide it? The humble one's surname is So, and name is Daesong. I lost my parents when young, so I do not know my father's name." The Prime Minister looked sorrowful and sighed. I know your name, but why do you hide your lineage? Since ancient times, there is no phoenix among crows and magpies, and no Kirin mixed among cows and horses. There is no one in the So clan who is originally base. Tell the whole truth, and leave this old man with no doubts. Seeing the Prime Minister's sincerity, Daesong shed tears and said, The humble one is the great-great-grandson of Hyun-song and the son of So Riang, the Minister of War. My sins were heavy, so heaven and earth collapsed. Parents died before I was 10. I could not achieve the family business, and after finishing the 3-year mourning, the family fortune was naturally exhausted. As I begged on the road, I received many favors from others, and I entrusted my traces to the mountains, making a living by cutting wood. Today, meeting the great man who asks about my lonely traces, I am grateful for the grace. Upon hearing this, the Prime Minister was greatly surprised and said, Lord So was my intimate friend. We ascended to the court together and served the holy ruler, but he asked to retire midway and return to his hometown. It has already been over 20 years. I wish to see Lord So again in this life, but he has already become a guest of the Yellow Springs, so how can I not be sad? Since ancient times, if a wise man and gentleman does not meet his time, poverty in the countryside is common, but if one is engrossed in hunger and thirst, one's nature is damaged. Do not receive mistreatment from others, but stay with me and wait for your time. How about it? Daesong bowed twice and said, Since the great man says you were my late father's friend, I am glad as if seeing my late father. After leaving home, my body drifted in all directions, and heaven and earth were dim. But heaven pitied me, and today I see the great man. I am grateful for the favor, but if I entrust myself to your noble house now, I fear my lowly and humble conduct will defile the great man's pure virtue. As he finished speaking, he shed tears. The Prime Minister comforted him, saying, In ancient times, Bai Li Shi worked as a shepherd, and Lu Shang became a fisherman on the Wei River. You regard cutting wood as sweet, so it is common for heroes and extraordinary men to be distressed in humble positions from olden times. Why do you grieve excessively? And he returned together with him. After obtaining young So Daeseong, the Prime Minister was overcome with joy. He cleaned the rear garden study and had him stay there. The servants were all surprised and considered it strange, saying to each other, The Lord has brought a certain beggar, and did not stop suspecting. The Prime Minister ordered So to bathe and provided clothes to perform the capping ceremony. His appearance was elegant, and his bone structure was refreshing, truly a hero of 1,000 ages, and a gentleman to cover the world. Who would know the beggar who lay on the fishing terrace? The Prime Minister held So's hand and sighed. Beautiful and wonderful. You possess the righteous energy of heaven and earth, so you will surely shine upon your ancestors in the future. Although Brother So has left the world, having such a heroic son, he need not envy others' 10 sons. So prostrated and said, I have received the great man's virtue, and the grace of entrusting myself to your noble gate is unforgettable even in death. The Prime Minister guessed young So's food intake and had 1 mal of rice cooked and given. So ate it all. The Prime Minister laughed. I know your amount. If the rice is insufficient, ask for more. So bowed and said, I eat 10 people's rice alone, so how could I eat more? He calmly had the table removed and sat in attendance talking. The Prime Minister went into the inner quarters. Lady Wang was talking with her daughter, and after welcoming the Prime Minister to sit, she saw his face was full of joy. She said, As the Prime Minister enters today, the harmony of spring breeze appears on your face. What good matter is there? The Prime Minister laughed heartily. Heaven pointed out a hero, so I did not realize that harmony naturally arose. The lady was happy and asked, What kind of person did you meet? The Prime Minister said, He is the grandson of So Hyun-song and the son of So Riang, the Minister of War. He is a hero between heaven and earth, but having lost his parents early, he drifted east and west. I brought him because I saw him. I will soon choose a date to form a kinship of different surnames, marriage. So isn't it beautiful? The lady already knew about bringing the beggar. At first, she thought it was just another person, but hearing this, she suddenly changed color and said, Although So's lineage is high, he has no parents or relatives and begged on the streets. The Lord only admires Lord So's pure virtue and has this intention. Previously you compared our daughter to Taisi, so are you not ashamed? The Prime Minister laughed. Why is the lady so ignorant? Since ancient times, if heroes and passionate men do not meet their time, they bury themselves in the countryside and hide their talents. Although young So is all alone, he is a descendant of a wise man, his demeanor is handsome, and his chest contains the talent and magnanimity to manage the world. So before long, his name will shake the four seas. Why loathe his current lowliness? Today the lady considers him base, but another day you will look up to him, so do not consider my words vain. The lady could not speak again, and was very displeased in her heart. The next day the Prime Minister arrived at the study. So was immersed in Sun Tzu's art of war. The Prime Minister laughed. In a time of peace, it is right to read the texts of Confucius and Mencius to cultivate talent. Why focus on military books? So knelt and said, even a sage king like Shun saw the rebellion of the four fiends, and a sage like the Duke of Zhou faced the turmoil in the east. Sage emperors and wise kings also had unexpected calamities. So how can we always trust in peace? When a man lives in the world, combining literary and military arts to follow the times and yin-yang, and going out as a general and entering as a minister is the proper work of a man, how can I only mediocrely focus on books? The Prime Minister gave a long sigh. Grand are these words. You are sufficient not to be ashamed before the ancients. I have 3 sons, but I lamented that they could not become broad-minded men. Hearing your words opens my heart. So bowed and thanked him. I am endlessly grateful that the great man speaks like this. But when people receive yin and yang, their dispositions are different. Your sons are gentle, but have become great sages of the world. So how can you compare them to the mediocrity of a common man? The Prime Minister laughed, brought wine, and urged him to drink. When they were half drunk, the Prime Minister lifted his glass and said, I have words to entrust to you. Will you happily accept them? So bowed his head and said, I would not dare refuse whatever the great man says, even if it were water or fire. What words are they? The Prime Minister said, this old man has 2 daughters. The eldest became the daughter-in-law of Zhongyang, the Minister of Works, and I have a remaining daughter named Pilneo Chebong, whose age is 15. Although she lacks the beauty of Jiang and the virtue of Taisi, she is not ashamed to handle the towel and comb housework for a gentleman. I wish to find her match, and heaven indicated you. This is a heavenly predestined relationship. However, I do not know your intention. If you accept, how about sending a wild goose proposing once? So bowed and thanked him. Your love for this humble one is like this, so the grace is unforgettable. How could I refuse? However, my age has not reached 20. My conduct does not match noble families. My body is lowly, and I am abandoned by the world. Comparing myself, I am a phoenix without wings and a dragon that lost its pearl. I have no place to be useful, so I dare not defile the great man's request. It would be like a wild chicken pairing with a phoenix, so I cannot accept your command. The Prime Minister smiled. I guess the meaning of your refusal. You fear a phoenix connecting with a crow or magpie. Although I am foolish, I would not take sand to seek a jewel. If you do not trust this old man's words, look at my daughter. Following his words, he took So's sleeve and led him into the inner quarters. So dared not disobey and was led to the middle hall. At this time, Lady Wang was pacing in the middle hall when she suddenly saw the Prime Minister leading a young man to the middle hall and ascending the main floor. Surprised, she hurriedly entered the inner room. The Prime Minister sat in the middle hall and asked a servant to invite the lady, saying, This is the lady's guest for 100 years, son-in-law. It is right to treat him. Why do you avoid him? The lady realized for the first time it was young, and was displeased in her heart, but since the Prime Minister's household management was usually strict, she came out reluctantly. The Prime Minister laughed and set the seats. So bowed twice and sat. The Prime Minister addressed the lady, pointing to So. This is Min, Mr. So's son. Since the lady treated the words lightly, he had brought him. The lady should happily call our daughter and see if there is a difference. He had the servant call the young lady. The servant received the order and went in. The lady felt very uncomfortable but dared not stop it. She briefly observed young So and saw that his frame was large, but he was not a beautiful scholar. She was displeased inwardly and thought, Chaebong is a delicate girl. I hope to get a match like her and see the joy of offspring, but how can I make that beggar a son-in-law? And she lamented without ceasing. The servant told the young lady, and the young lady was surprised and said, Young So is an outsider. Why does father wish to show me? I cannot follow the order. Tell him I am sick. The servant reported this. The lady was secretly happy, but the prime minister was displeased and urged her to come out. When the young lady apologized for disobeying the father's order twice and thrice and did not come out, the prime minister was greatly angry, saying, You disobey your father's order, so the 3 bonds are crumbled. If I urge you 3 times and you do not follow, I will sever the righteousness of father and daughter. Hearing this, the young lady was terrified and agitated. As she was about to come out following the servant reported first. So tried to get up and avoid her, but the Duke laughed. Calling the daughter is for your sake. Why do you try to avoid? And urged the young lady. The young lady moved her lotus steps to obey her parents, so could not avoid it, so he clasped his hands and stood up. The Duke ordered them to see each other. The young lady bowed first, and so returned the bow. After they each sat down, the Duke addressed the young lady. Heaven gave a connection, so I brought him for you, but why did you refuse repeatedly and cause my embarrassment? The young lady was ashamed and lowered her eyebrows. The Duke looked back at So and said, Although my daughter is not pretty, she will not disgrace your talent and virtue. How is she to you? So prostrated and only praised her. The prime minister did not stop laughing. So raised his eyes to look at the young lady. She was not adorned with makeup or colorful clothes, and her green hair covered her ears. She looked like a bright moon shining in faint clouds, a pair of mirrors hanging on distant mountains. Her cheeks were like red peach blossoms melting in the spring breeze, and her red lips were like cherries reddened with dew. Her brilliant radiance was like a peony flower shimmering in the morning sun. Truly, if not a descent from the Queen Mother of the West Jasper Pond feast, it was a moon palace fairy teasing the human world. Upon seeing her once, his spirit was entranced. He thought for a while, I have not seen many female beauties, and thought nothing would surprise my eyes, but facing the young lady today, my mind and body are entranced. The young lady also lifted her eyebrows briefly to examine young Firm. So, his dignity was strict and his appearance was majestic. So upon seeing him once, she admired him in her heart without ceasing. The prime minister looked back at So and said, Today, as we form a connection between a gentleman and a lady, you two should each compose a poem to make this old man's heart happy. So declined, then gracefully spread out the flowered paper and wrote. The dragon and snake seemed to fly, calligraphy, and the words were lively. It said, The spring breeze created a connection for people to ascend to the jade capital. It is like shedding the dust of the world. The image of Chang'e reflects in the mirror water. I realize the moonlight has no brilliance. The prime minister praised the splendor of the meaning repeatedly and urged the young lady to reply. The young lady lowered her eyebrows and reluctantly lifted a coral brush to write in one stroke. Every character was like a jewel. The poem said, The tall pine is the integrity of a gentleman. The swaying green bamboo is the fidelity of a virtuous woman. Today, as the phoenix sings and flowers bloom, I compose a poem. Heaven and earth are witnesses, and the sun and moon are bright. The prime minister received it and praised it countless times, saying, Pointing to heaven and earth and speaking of sun and moon, the firm will is beautiful. Comparing to pine and bamboo is the intent to keep chastity. Why is the meaning of the words slightly ominous? However, it is a time of joy, so why worry? He exchanged the 2 poems and gave them to each other, saying, Today you have achieved human relations, so keep them respectively and make them tokens of faith. Young So received it and saw the poetic style was fresh and the strokes were strange. He admired it in his heart and put it in his sleeve. The young lady also did not refuse and received it happily. The prime minister's face was full of joy, but Lady Wang alone was displeased. When the evening sun set, young So came out to the study and faced the candle, admiring the young lady's talent and virtue endlessly. The Prime Minister's death and persecution. The Prime Minister wanted to choose a date to complete the marriage, but alas, the Creator was jealous. The Prime Minister suddenly fell ill and his symptoms became critical. The three sons were tied to government posts and were in the capital. The road was far, so they could not communicate. Young So tasted the medicine and spent days and nights in worry. The Prime Minister knew he would pass away and called his wife and the young lady to sigh. My age is 70. It is not regrettable, but not seeing my three sons and also not seeing my daughter's marriage is a lingering regret. After I die, the lady should manage the household affairs and do everything as if I were present, and complete the marriage immediately after 3 years. He also called the young lady, held her hand, and sighed. Originally, I know your heavenly nature, so I have nothing more to say, but do not forget the poem composed in the middle hall. He also called young So and left a will, saying, Human life rests with heaven, so it is difficult to borrow even a moment. My daughter's lifetime lies with you. After speaking, he passed away. He was 75 years old. Amidst the extreme grief, the wife and young lady frequently fainted. Young So personally took charge of the funeral rites and prepared the mourning. When Lee Seng, the sons, and others heard the obituary and returned, the wife and young lady were even more devastated. Young So heard that Lee Seng and the others had come and communicated his condolences. Lee Seng and the others did not know him and asked the mother. The wife told Young So's background in detail. Lee Seng and the others met Young So and received condolences. Observing Young So, his appearance was majestic, like the form of a general. They were reluctant in their hearts, spoke briefly, and went in. Young So saw Lee Seng and the others for the first time and lamented endlessly that there was no one to emulate the Prime Minister's magnanimity and great virtue. After that, he put away books and only slept. When Lee Seng and the others selected a date and held the funeral, Young So reluctantly got up to attend the funeral and then completely abandoned his hat and clothes, formal attire, grooming, and did not associate with Lee Seng and the others. Because of this, the wife was even more discordant, never asking after him once. The servants also mistreated him and fed him only once a day. His hunger and thirst were severe, and knowing he could not last long, he thought, I will stay for now and wait for the marriage. Lady Wang said to her three sons, Young So is originally a beggar. The Prime Minister recklessly brought him and decided on Chaebong's marriage, becoming a disgrace to the family. This is what I resent. You think of a trick to drive Young So out. The eldest son T. Egyeong replied, We also find him disagreeable, but we know the brother-in-law's loyalty and integrity. We fear there will be regret after sending Young So away. The lady said, When the daughter's spring yearning fills up, she will naturally change her mind. You just execute the measure to drive Young So out. Lee Seng and the others came out to the study. Young So was sleeping, but reluctantly dressed and welcomed them. Lee Seng said, The scholar abandons his studies completely. How will you achieve fame? Young So sighed. Fame is something for luxurious people to do. Lee Seng said, Our late father is not here, and if we go to the capital, there will be no host to treat you, so I fear the guest's heart will be lonely. Young So heard this, paused briefly knowing the meaning, and replied, For a person with no reliance, even a temporary stay is presumptuous. How could I hope for the future? However, the great man did not look at my mediocrity when alive and made a firm promise with the young lady, so I entrusted myself to your noble family. I hope the brothers will tolerate me. Lee Seng laughed. Although there is a promise, 3 years is far away, so do not worry about the wedding, and went into the inner quarters to tell the whole story to the wife. The wife was greatly angry. This fellow uses the marriage as an excuse. What shall we do? Jung Seng said, I will spend 1,000 gold to hire an assassin to remove the worry. Lady Wang was greatly delighted. That trick matches my mind. Do it quickly. He immediately called an assassin named Jo Hyun, told him the story, and Hyun said, Do not worry and watch my skill. After receiving the gold, he waited for night and went to the study. The assassination attempt and escape. At this time, Young So sent Lee Seng and the others away and sighed, The host dislikes the guest. What shall I do? Just then, the hat So was wearing came off by itself, soared into the air, and fell. So was surprised, immediately burned the hat, briefly looked at the 8 trigrams, and looked up to heaven sighing, "What disaster will I suffer?" He lit a candle and sat. Around the 3rd watch, midnight, a gloomy wind arose. He performed the art of transformation to hide his body and watched the movements. The assassin turned into a gloomy wind and entered. Looking around, there was no trace of a person, so he tried to go outside. So leaned under the candle and called out, "You, holding a sword in the deep night, whom do you intend to harm?" Jo-hyun realized for the first time it was young Tale So, and stabbed with his sword, but suddenly So was nowhere to be seen. Hyun was surprised and hesitated. So scolded from under the candle in the north, "How can a thief match me?" He flew his body and struck Jo-hyun with a sword. The cold sword light flashed, and So was nowhere to be seen. Hyun tried to come out urgently, but suddenly a young boy played with a short sword and sang a desolate song. "Is it the time of the warring states? Dust and turmoil are chaotic. Is it the universe of Chu and Han? Killing intent is majestic. Even the strength that uproots mountains and spirit that covers the world could not cross the river east of the Yangtze. Can the common man Jo-hyun cross the Yi River? In the obscure tune, slaughter is coiled, sad. If you cultivate and awaken your mind, follow the path of goodness." Jo-hyun finished listening and looked. It was young So. Greatly surprised, he thought, "I learned my skills and there was no one to match me, but this person is most extraordinary." He threw his sword again. The sword sound clanged, and young So was nowhere to be seen. Hyun was surprised and looked for his sword, but even the sword was gone. Considering it strange, he raised the candle and looked around. Suddenly young So held a sword and shouted loudly, "Ignorant thief! You value the price money heavily and try to harm an innocent person. How can heaven be indifferent? I intended not to kill and admonished you with the way, but you do not realize it to the end, so do not resent me." He raised the sword and cut off Jo-hyun's head. Greatly angry, he held the sword and tried to enter the inner quarters to kill Lee Sang and the others, but thought, "It is something a gentleman cannot bear to do." He threw the sword, pulled out a brush, and composed a poem to paste on the wall. "Receiving the host's grace, Mount Tai is light. The guest's affection is deep, the rivers and seas are shallow. A person loses a friend who understands his music, soulmate. It is hard to meet again. The guest's stay is not long, the bad fortune is not exhausted. The descendants are unfilial, they changed and became enemies. Escaping with life, heaven grieves. Thinking of the beautiful person, it is like a floating cloud. I do not know. When the bright sun rises, they will know Daeseong's name. Arriving at this house again, who knows what day it will be." Upon finishing writing, he threw the brush and flung his body out into the night, heading vaguely toward the west. At this time, when day broke, Lee Sang and the others went out to the outer quarters to check. Human traces were quiet. They opened the door and saw a corpse. They thought it was young, but it was Jo-hyun's corpse. Greatly surprised, they doubted each other and examined the room. There was a writing on the wall that wasn't there before. They saw it was young So's handwriting. Shocked, they said, "The meaning of this text shows he knew the situation, so it will surely become a future trouble. What shall we do about this?" They immediately cleared Jo-hyun's corpse, told the whole story to the wife, and discussed, saying, "Young So was insolent and ungrateful, and left without saying goodbye." One day, the young lady heard that young So had gone out and was suspicious. She told Nanyong, "Go and find out for me." Nanyong copied the writing on the study wall and brought it. The young lady finished reading it, lost color, and lamented, "Even if a family is unhappy, how can there be such a strange and scandalous thing?" And she did not stop sighing. Meanwhile, young So cut down the assassin and walked all day long. Suddenly facing a great sea, he looked around, but there was no boat, so crossing was hopeless. He looked up to heaven and sighed. After a while, a clear wind rose and the sound of a clear flute was heard. So thought it was a fishing boat and called out loudly, "Fishermen on the sea, please carry across a person whose path is blocked." The person stopped the flute and docked the boat at the riverbank. So hurriedly boarded and saw a blue-clad boy with a biokryok flower in his hair and a jade flute in his hand. Knowing he was not an ordinary person, so gave thanks, Human eyes are ignorant and did not recognize the ferry boy asking for the boat. Please forgive the sin. The boy said, how could there be a fishing boat in the weak water of 3,000 li? He rowed the boat and docked at the western bank, asking him to disembark. So asked, the weak water is the great sea of the west. How did we cross in an instant? I fear the ferry boy is teasing a worldly guest. The boy laughed. I received the command of the Dragon King of the East Sea to carry the Lord across, so why worry about this amount of sea? He took out a fairy fruit from his sleeve and gave it, so received and ate it, and his spirit became refreshed. He thanked him repeatedly. The boy said farewell, turned the boat, and left floatingly. So gave thanks toward the air and walked west all day. A mountain blocked the way, reaching the sky. He followed a stream up through stone cliffs. Green pines and azure bamboos were dense, strange flowers and exotic herbs bore fragrance, and phoenixes and peacocks came and went in pairs. Coveting the scenery, he went in gradually. Clouds and mist were thick and the path was cut off, so he did not care. Now where to go? Suddenly the sound of a wind chime was heard, so he thought there was a temple and went up. An old monk came out to meet him, saying, the honored guest comes, but I could not go out to meet you. Please forgive the sin. So returned the greeting in a flurry. The old monk led So into the temple. All the monks bowed, greeted him warmly, and offered dinner. So thanked them for the hospitality, saying, do you treat a guest wandering without a destination so generously? The monks replied, several thousand taels of gold and silver from the Lord's house are in this temple. So replied, I am originally destitute, so what gold and silver would I have? The old monk laughed. This land is Cheonggyeongsa Temple on Mount Yeongbo in the western regions. Decades ago, I received the Buddha's command and went to the Lord's house. You donated several thousand taels of gold and silver. So we repaired this temple and offered prayers. The world-honored one was moved and pointed out the Lord. Also the Lord has a 5-year connection with this humble monk, so do not worry. Hearing this, So felt both joy and sorrow. He stayed and discussed military books and scriptures with the old monk, becoming a monk with hair in the mountains. War and heroism. Meanwhile, in the 13th year of Chenghua, thieves arose like bees in various places. The emperor worried and prepared military weapons. Reports from each province urgently stated that the northern Xiongnu, together with the western Chanyu, led 1 million elite soldiers and over 1,000 generals to invade the borders and receive the surrender of over 10 cities. The emperor was greatly surprised, gathered his ministers for discussion, and mobilized General of the Household Yu Mungyong and Military Commissioner So Song-tae with 500,000 elite soldiers and over 1,000 brave generals. After several days, they arrived at Imguan, met the barbarian soldiers, and deployed their formation. Song-tae scolded the barbarian king to provoke a fight. Wei Huang rushed out first and shouted loudly, ignorant barbarians dare to resist the heaven's army. I will cut off your head to shine the great nation's dignity. The barbarian king was greatly angry. Who can cut the enemy general? Guldul Tong held his spear askew and met Wei Huang. They fought, and within a few bouts, Wei Huang was cut by Guldul Tong. A barbarian general rushed out and fought Wei Huang, mistake in source text, likely another general, cut off his head in over 50 bouts, and charged left and right. Song-tae was greatly angry and chased the barbarian general. The general ran away, so Song-tae returned to the main camp to discuss strategies to defeat the enemy with Mungyong. At this time, the barbarian king and barbarian general So Young divided into 3 paths and attacked the Ming camp by surprise. Song-tae and Mungyong suffered an unexpected disaster. So Young killed Mungyong, the barbarian king cut down Song-tae, and they crushed the Ming camp. So the corpses were like mountains. The barbarian king drove the great army to Jingwan and attacked urgently. The defending general Zhou Gyong could not match them and reported to the capital. The emperor was greatly shocked, seated the whole court, and said, I intend to lead the campaign myself. Who can be the vanguard? General of the Ivory Gate Ho Hyop reported, although I have no talent, I will become the vanguard and defeat the thieves. The emperor was greatly delighted, made Ho Hyop the vanguard, Mo Sejing the army commander, and leading 500,000 elite soldiers, the emperor himself became the central commander. He had the crown prince guard the capital and marched out. This was September of the autumn of the 13th year of Chenghua. Back to the story. Young So had been at Chungyongsa Temple for 5 years. Thinking of his hometown, he could not sleep. One day, a voice from the air said, "Yongbu, heavenly fortune," as opened. He opened the door and looked out. There was nothing, and the bright moon was quiet. He looked at the astronomical signs. The purple Tura star, Emperor's star, left its position and was faint in the west, and the wing star, Enemy star, left its seat and was full of killing intent, encroaching on the purple Tura star. Young So sighed. Surely the barbarians have become strong and are invading the central plains. He returned to his room and recited military books. The old monk said, "Now that we face a turbulent time, please shine your name." A while ago in a dream I accompanied the world-honored one to the Jade capital. The Grand Supreme Elderly Lord said to the Jade Emperor, "The winged star is killing the purple Tura star." The Jade Emperor commanded, "Punish the winged star and do not let it stay in the human world." The winged star is the barbarian king's ruling star, and the purple Tura star is the son of heaven's ruling star. Therefore, I can guess. He entered a side room and brought out a precious sword, saying, "When this humble monk was young and went up Mount Taihang, a blue dragon was coiled on a stone cliff. Seeing me, it was surprised and rose into the air. This sword was placed on the stone, so I picked it up and hid it. It was waiting for the general. So received and looked at it. It was a 3-foot steel sword, and amidst the brilliant light, the 7 stars faintly shone. So gave thanks and packed his travel gear. The old monk said, 'If you go several hundred li like this, there will be someone to save you.' Suddenly he was nowhere to be seen. So gave countless thanks toward the air and left Chungyongsa Temple. He traveled several hundred li. The day grew dark and there were no village houses, so he was anxious. Suddenly a blue-clad boy appeared and asked, 'Are you not Lord So from Haedong?' So replied, 'Indeed I am, but how do you know?' The boy replied, 'My old master invites you.' So followed the boy for several li. There was a clean thatched house. In the center, possibly a bronze Buddha, an old man was leaning on a desk. It was Prime Minister Li of Cheongju. He went forward and bowed twice. The Prime Minister rejoiced, held So's hand and sighed. 'After meeting you, I could not achieve my daughter's marriage. Even as a dead spirit, how could I not be sad? However, I regret the cruelty of my wife and others. Do not blame them. Form the connection with my daughter and console this old man's spirit.' So bowed and said, 'I will respectfully receive your instructions.' The Prime Minister praised him and brought out a set of armor and helmet, saying, 'If you wear this, your body will be light, spears and swords will not penetrate, and water and fire cannot harm. The name is body-protecting armor.' So was greatly delighted and thanked him. The winged star, disciple of Neja in heaven, is not an ordinary person, so do not underestimate the enemy. Also, tomorrow at the hour of the horse, noon, you will meet a dragon horse, so you will be able to succeed." He lay down on his seat. So also dozed off, then woke up startled by the sound of a wild goose. The Prime Minister and the house were gone, and only the armor and helmet lay there. So thanked the air, gathered the armor, and proceeded. An old man in simple clothes, leaning on a goosefoot cane, was watching cranes dance, seeing what. So he said, "My house is shabby, but how about resting for a while?" So followed him. It was a thatched house in a beautiful landscape, very clean. After sitting and talking, suddenly a sound like thunder was heard. So asked, "Where does this sound come from?" The old man said, "I obtained a foal a few years ago, but it was extremely fierce and tried to harm people. I tried to starve it to death, but it acts even more violently. So it is distressing." Hearing this, So asked to see it. The old man took So to see it. It was truly a dragon and ghost. So thought of the Prime Minister's words in his heart and said to the man, "The road to go is far. If you give me the horse, I will give you a heavy price later." He went to the horse's side and warned, "If you are indeed a blue piebald horse, do you know So Daeseong of Haedong?" The horse looked for a while, pawed with its hoof, raised its head, and rested it on So's arm. The old man laughed loudly and brought out a golden saddle, saying, "The dragon has obtained the Sintamani jewel, so shine your name." So thanked him and asked his honorable name. The old man said, "I am the immortal of Okdong," and suddenly vanished. So was surprised, realizing he was a mountain god, and gave thanks. After several days, he arrived at the capital. The Son of Heaven had already gone on the campaign. He went directly to the main camp, saw Army General Mo Sejing, and communicated his name. Sejing saw his youth and kept him in the army. At this time, when the Son of Heaven confronted the barbarian king, the vanguard general Ho Hyap killed the barbarian general Yuk Wan and rampaged, but was killed by So Young. Also, continuously, dozens of Ming generals were killed by barbarian generals, so there was no one who dared to go out. At this time, So watched the victory and defeat of both camps, and his indignation grew pent up. He mounted his horse and shouted, "Rebel So Young, do you know me?" He rushed in, cut off So Young's head, held it, returned to the main camp, and saw Sejing saying, "The small general violated military orders due to youthful vigor. Please execute military law." Sejing was greatly delighted, held his hand and said, "I did not use you because I worried about your youth. General, forgive my foolishness." Daeseong thanked him and withdrew. There was no one among the officers and soldiers of the Ming camp who did not praise him. At this time, the Son of Heaven lamented seeing his old generals die. Seeing Daesong's bravery, he summoned Sejing and asked. Sejing reported, "This is Daesong, the son of the former Minister of War So Riang." The Son of Heaven immediately called him in, held Daesong's hand and said, "Your father served the country with loyalty, and you are also this praiseworthy now." At this time, the barbarian king discussed with his generals, "We cannot match Daesong with force, so we will capture him with a trick." He sent Somhan to attack Chang'an, the capital, by surprise. At this time, a spy reported, "Enemy soldiers have arrived at the capital and are attacking urgently. It is extremely dangerous." The Son of Heaven appointed the marshal, Daesong, and sent him. The barbarian king lured Daesong away, and after the night deepened, he smashed through the north and west gates. Unable to gather their senses, the number of those dying was countless. The Son of Heaven was devastated and intended to kill himself. The barbarian king had already kicked over the horse the king was riding and demanded the surrender document. The king covered his face with the dragon robe's sleeve and wailed loudly. Heaven and earth were gloomy. At this time, the marshal arrived at Chang'an. The barbarian king did not come, but Seomhan had come. The marshal was furious, cut down Seomhan in one bout, warned the blue piebald horse, and arrived at the main camp in an instant. The Son of Heaven was in distress. The marshal was greatly angry and cut down the barbarian king. The marshal offered the barbarian king's head to the Son of Heaven and said, "Letting your majesty be in distress is the disloyalty of your subject." The Son of Heaven praised him 10,000 times, returned to the palace, and when granting titles to the generals, he invested Daeseong as the king of Lu. The marshal reluctantly gave thanks and traveled to Haedong first. All officials saw him off outside the city, and his majesty was grand. He arrived at the ancestral mountain, composed a text to perform sacrifices, scattered silver and gold to delight the servants, and then arrived in the state of Lu. Prime Minister Jo Gyum led all officials to attend him at the Bongak Pavilion, shouted, "Long live," and reported, "Your Highness occupies the precious throne, but the Queen's seat is empty. Please select a holy mother." The king said, "I hear that the daughter of Li Jin in Chongju, China, has womanly virtue, so select her." Meanwhile, young lady Li did not know whether young So was alive or dead. She told her mother, "Young So must have left the world, so I will wear mourning clothes from today. Mother, please know this." She began the mourning rites. Her sorrowful pleading could not be watched. One day, it was reported that a eunuch from the state of Lu had come. The wife invited the eunuch to see him. After the greetings, the eunuch said, "The king of Lu's queen's seat was empty, and he was lonely, but he said the 1,000-year queen is in your noble house, so I came. Also, His Highness the King of Lu offers a letter." The wife received and looked. It was young So's handwriting. She hurriedly entered the young lady's bedroom, showed the young lady and said, "How can there be such a thing in the world?" The young lady received and looked. One envelope told the whole story, and one envelope was the poem he had written himself. Suddenly shedding tears, the wife regretted and comforted the young lady. After a few days, ceremonial officials came. The young lady resolved and bid farewell to the wife. The wife warned, "It is said that a woman's travel is far from parents and brothers, so do not grieve excessively." After many days, she arrived at the state of Lu. The king welcomed her. They entered the Phoenix Palace and performed the ceremony. The majesty was grand. After that, he sent an envoy to invite Lady Wang and Li Sang and others, held a banquet to treat them generously, did not mind the past events at all, and held a sacrifice at Prime Minister Li's grave. As the king governed, he bestowed holy virtue in civil and military affairs, so the song of peace was transmitted in the streets. In the spring of the 28th year, first month, he made the eldest son, Crown Prince Yunin, the successor, and the rest were each titled as lords. They enjoyed happiness, and one day, while admiring the spring scenery, the king and queen ascended to heaven on the same day.